I always believed love was enough. That if you gave your whole heart, your loyalty, your sacrifices, then love would shield you from betrayal. For years I wore my marriage like a shield, convinced it was unbreakable. But now, looking back, I see how blind I was. Because in the end he chose her, his mistress, over me. It started with whispers. Not from his mouth, of course, but from the little inconsistencies in his stories. Late nights at the office, mysterious business trips that never matched his company's calendar. Phone calls taken in hushed tones, his back turned to me. At first I told myself I was overthinking, that my exhaustion was making me paranoid. After all, we had been married for 8 years. We had built a life together. Why would he risk it all? One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I never went through his phone before. Trust had always been sacred to me, but something inside me, a mix of fear and intuition, told me to look. My hand shook as I picked it up. The screen lit up with a message. I miss your touch already. Counting the hours until I'm in your arms again. Oh, my heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled, my trembling fingers dragging me into the abyss of truth. Thread after thread of secret conversations, passionate words, hotel room rendezvous. And there it was. The name. Laura. His co-worker. The woman he'd mentioned casually over dinner, the one he said was annoying but harmless. Harmless. My entire life cracked open from that one word. When he stepped out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming like nothing was wrong, I sat frozen on the bed, phone in hand. His eyes landed on it, and in that instant, his face drained of color. You went through my phone? He whispered, more in shock than anger. You went through my life. I spat back, tears burning my eyes. How long, Daniel? How long have you been lying to me? He didn't answer immediately. The silence between us stretched into a suffocating void. Then he sat down, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. A year, he finally admitted, his voice hoarse. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't plan it. But Laura, she makes me feel alive again. Alive. So what was I to him? A corpse? The betrayal wasn't just in his affair. It was in how easily he confessed, like my heart wasn't splintering in front of him. I had given him everything. My youth, my dreams, my unwavering faith. And yet, a stranger had walked into our lives and stolen the very thing I thought was mine forever. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I was ready to leave, but because I couldn't breathe in the same space as him. I went to my sister's house, where I collapsed on her couch and sobbed until I had no tears left. But here's the cruel twist of love. Even when someone betrays you, the heart doesn't switch off like a light. I still loved him. Despite the humiliation, despite the anger, I wanted him to choose me, to beg for forgiveness, to tell me I was worth fighting for. Instead, weeks later, when I confronted him, when I demanded he cut her off and work on us, he looked me dead in the eyes and said words that would haunt me forever. I can't. I love her. That was the moment my world ended. Not with shouting or violence, but with the quiet, devastating truth. He chose his mistress over me. The morning after he said, I love her, The city felt louder. Car horns were harsher, the air colder. I stood in our kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug I didn't drink from, staring at the magnet calendar we used to plan our life. Groceries, dentist, niece's birthday, rent. Little squares still pretending we were a unit. It was obscene. How ordinary things looked when everything inside me was ruined. Daniel walked in quietly, like a guest in his own home. His tie was crooked. He used to ask me to fix it. I didn't. "I'll sleep on the couch," he said, as if that solved anything. "Do what you want," I replied. The words came out flat, a calm mask over a storm. "You've been doing that anyway." The silence between us ate the room. He poured coffee, stood, didn't sip. I watched his hand, a hand I knew as well as my own, shake almost imperceptibly. "We can," he started, then stopped. "We can be honest at least." I laughed and the sound frightened both of us. "Honest now?" He nodded, staring at the dark coffee. "I don't want to hurt you anymore." "Then stop choosing her," I said, simple as oxygen. "Stop, delete her number. Quit the job if you have to. Sit down with me and do the work. I'm right here." He lifted his eyes and I saw it, the decision already made. A softness, almost tender, like he was saying goodbye. "I want to do the right thing," he whispered. "But when I think about her, I feel alive," I finished for him, because apparently we were doing reruns now. He put the cup down. "I'm sorry." I thought of every apology anyone had ever wasted. The "I'm sorry" to a cracked plate, a missed delivery, a late text. This one sat like lead in my throat. I went upstairs, my feet knowing the way, and closed our bedroom door behind me. On the dresser, framed photos, beach sunsets, messy hair, a cake with too many candles and not enough breath to blow them out, stared back. Evidence of a crime scene that had once been a love story. I moved through the rituals of leaving without truly leaving. I folded sweaters into a suitcase and then took them out again. I pulled his shirts off the closet rod and laid them on the bed like bodies. I opened drawers just to hear the tiny clean click as they shut. When I finally sat, the room tilted. I pressed my palms into my thighs until it stopped. My sister called. "Come over," she said. "I'm staying," I said, surprising myself. "For now." "Why?" "Because this house is mine too. Because I'm not the one who cheated. Because if there's a goodbye in me, I want it measured, not ripped from my throat." She sighed. "Okay, I'm here." That night I slept on the far edge of the king-size bed, my back to a canyon of cold sheets. Somewhere downstairs, a couch groaned under a man I used to know. Days learned the shape of our new cruelty. We became polite strangers with shared bills. We texted like roommates. "Can you pick up milk?" "Rent is due." "Your package came." I worked late just to keep from coming home. At the office, I filed reports with surgical precision, like if I made enough neat columns, I'd put order back into my life. People asked if I was all right. I smiled with all my teeth and said, "Fine." On the fourth night, I found one of his shirts folded on my pillow. It smelled like that cologne I bought him on our second anniversary. The good one. The no occasion, the just because you. There was a note on top. his handwriting careful like it used to be when he wrote me poems in college. "I won't bring her here," it read. "This space is yours. I'll be looking for a place." I stared at the ink until it blurred. "This space is ours," I wanted to write back, but the pen was a sword I didn't trust my hand to hold. On Friday, I made a decision. If my life was going to end, I wanted to witness it, not hear about it in bullet points. I texted him. "Dinner. Saturday. We talk," he replied. "Okay." A single word that used to mean everything and now meant nothing. Saturday. I dressed like armor. Black dress, simple gold hoops. The boots that made me taller than my fear. We met at a small restaurant we used to like before work, and routine scrubbed spontaneity from our marriage. He was there first, fidgeting with the cutlery. For a second, the decades fell away, and I saw the boy who used to wait for me at the campus library, his knee bouncing under the table because he couldn't sit still when he was in love. We ordered food we didn't eat. We talked about logistics, the lease, the car, the dog we talked ourselves out of adopting last year because we were too busy. Mundane graves for a monumental loss. "Do you remember our first road trip?" I asked suddenly. He looked up. "Blue Ridge," he said, smiling despite himself. "You sang off-key to that one song the whole way. The inn had those terrible floral curtains, and we pretended we liked them because we didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings," I said, and we laughed. For a heartbeat, we were almost us again, two people who knew the same memories. Then it was gone. "I'm meeting her tomorrow," he said softly, as if confessing to a priest, "to talk about what this means." I sat very still. The restaurant hummed thin to a high ring. "You're going to tell her you're staying with me," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a dare I wanted him to take. He didn't blink. "I'm going to tell her I'm moving forward." My hands found each other under the table. "And what am I asked. "Your history?" He swallowed. "You're my life," he said, voice breaking. "You're the person who made me who I am." "Then keep being that person with me," I said. "Choose me." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, I already knew. He reached across the table, not to touch me, but to steady the fork he'd knocked askew. "I can't," he said. There, in the soft light and clinking glassware, our marriage stopped breathing. When I got home, the house felt like an empty theater after the audience has left. I walked into the bedroom, pulled a suitcase from under the bed, and placed it open on the floor. This time I filled it, not with panic, but with a quiet, brutal grace. A sweater, a book, the mug I actually drink from, my grandmother's necklace, the perfume I wore on our wedding day. I talked to the silence while I packed. "You chose her," I said, and for the first time the sentence didn't shatter me. It steadied me. Before I zipped the bag, I opened my nightstand and took out a small, nearly forgotten notebook, the kind I used to keep when I believed thoughts could save me. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a single line, "Tomorrow. I begin again." Then I closed it, turned off the light, and lay down in the middle of the bed, right where I belonged. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds like prison bars, slashing across my face as I opened my eyes. It was my first day truly alone in the house. Daniel had gone to work, or maybe to her. I didn't ask anymore. Last night's decision was still in my bones. I was leaving. But before I walked out for good, I needed to reclaim something of myself that had been lost long before Laura existed. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug like it held a map to freedom. My phone buzzed. It was my sister. "Do you want me to come?" "No," I texted back. "I have to do this myself." I spent the morning moving through each room, saying goodbye, not to furniture or walls, but to versions of me still lingering in the corners. The living room, where I had spent winters curled up with Daniel, believing his arm around me was a promise. The bathroom, where I had seen his reflection behind mine in the mirror, two blurred shapes brushing teeth in quiet companionship. The hallway, where we'd argued and made up and hung pictures of trips we'd promised to repeat someday. Now, the pictures looked like exhibits in a museum dedicated to a marriage that had died without anyone noticing. I took the frames down one by one, setting them face down on the carpet. The sound of the glass clicking against the floor was like punctuation, a period at the end of every forever we'd spoken. When I reached the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my notebook again. My handwriting, once neat and looped, had become angular, sharp. I wrote, "He doesn't get to take me from me. I will not shrink so he can fit into another life." I closed the notebook, slipped it into my bag, and went to the closet. Inside hung dresses for anniversaries that would never come, sweaters still smelling faintly of his cologne, heels from dinners where we'd held hands under the table. I touched each piece like a wound, then let it go. I packed only what was mine. The clothes I loved, the things I'd bought with my own money, the small treasures of a woman who existed before she was someone's wife. By afternoon, the suitcase sat zipped at the door. The house was unnaturally quiet, but in that quiet I heard myself again, not the voice of the betrayed wife, not the echo of Laura's shadow, but me, the girl who once drove across the country with the windows down, singing badly, believing the world was wide and waiting. I texted Daniel one last time. "The key's on the counter. Don't call me." Then I slipped my grandmother's necklace over my head, the tiny charm cold against my skin, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me like the closing of a chapter. The road out, I didn't go to my sister's right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the city unfurl around me. Traffic lights blurred into streaks of color. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, but for the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of control. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were swollen but clear. There was something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Not joy, not yet, but resolve. I turned the car toward the coast. It was a 2-hour drive, long enough for my thoughts to rearrange themselves. As the city fell away and the horizon widened, I rolled down the window. The salt air hit my face like a blessing. I thought of all the weekends we'd promised to take beach trips, but never did. Now here I was, alone, but free. I parked near a stretch of sand where the ocean hissed against the shore. There were no tourists, just gulls and waves and a sky that seemed to go on forever. I walked until my boots sank into the damp sand and then stopped, breathing in the brine and wind. For a long time I stood there, clutching my coat around me. Then I sat, letting the cold seep through the fabric, grounding me. The sea roared and retreated, like a heartbeat too big for any one body. I took out my notebook again and wrote, "He chose his mistress. I choose myself." The words looked small against the page, but they felt enormous inside me. The first step toward healing, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, I realized something startling. I wasn't thinking about Daniel, not about what he was doing, not about whether he regretted it, not about Laura. My mind was quiet, focused on the present, the orange glow on the water, the grit of sand under my palms, the cry of a distant bird. I understood then that healing wouldn't be a single moment, but a series of small ones, like this. Choosing to stand up, choosing to walk away, choosing to write instead of beg, choosing to breathe instead of break. The tide reached my boots, soaking them. I laughed out loud, a sound unplanned, unforced. It startled a gull into flight. "Tomorrow, I begin again," I whispered. And this time it wasn't a note in a book. It was a promise to myself. I stood, brushing sand from my coat. The sky was turning violet. Behind me lay the life I had built with him. Ahead of me, the wide, uncertain road back to myself. I started walking. The ocean followed me home the next morning, salt clinging to my hair, a quiet steadiness in my chest like the pull of the tide. I drove to my sister's and set my suitcase by the door. She hugged me without saying anything, the way you hug someone at a graveside, firm, certain, not pretending you can fix anything. "I made pancakes," she said. "I forgot if you still like them with blueberries." "I do," I said, and it felt like recovering a word I hadn't used in years. We ate at her small table under a crooked print of wildflowers. The room smelled like butter and coffee. After I showered and stood too long in the steam, watching my reflection fog and clear, like the way grief moves through a day. I spent the next week rebuilding a life with blunt instruments, spreadsheets for expenses, a second-hand laptop for freelance work I'd put off, a cheap gym membership mostly so I could sit in the sauna and pretend it counted. I found a short-term sublet with peeling paint and light that puddled on the floor in late afternoons. I learned which corner store sold the good eggs and which barista misspelled my name the same charming wrong way every time. At night, I wrote. Not about him at first, about anything else. Recipes I wanted to try, books I'd meant to read, the memory of a field I walked through when I was 15, where dandelion seeds rose in 1,000 lit lanterns at the sweep of my hand. I wrote to prove to myself I still had a voice, that it hadn't been buried in the rubble of my marriage. On the 8th day, my phone buzzed with a name that used to feel like home. Daniel. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then he texted, "Can we talk?" I typed, "No," deleted it. Typed, "About what?" Deleted that too. Finally, I put the phone face down and went to wash dishes that were already clean. A minute later, another text. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help. I want to say what I didn't say well enough. The old me would have sprinted to meet him at whatever coffee shop he suggested, prepared a thesis on our years together and what we could salvage. The new me stood at the sink and breathed in and out until my heartbeat stopped trying to kick out of my chest. Send it in a letter, I wrote. No meeting, no calls. Just write it down. An hour later, an email arrived. The subject line was my name. I made tea, sat by the window, and read. He wrote about fear, how success hardened him, how he began to measure love against the scales of accomplishment, how Laura arrived like a mirror angled to a flattering light, how he mistook attention for salvation. He wrote about loneliness, about the way our routines became walls instead of rooms. He wrote the sentence men write when they've decided to be forgiven without asking, I never meant to hurt you. I closed my eyes. My tea went cold. Then, tucked near the end, one true thing. I chose what made me feel powerful because I was too cowardly to sit with the places I felt small. You never made me small. I did that to myself. I'm sorry I read it twice. The apology didn't unbreak anything, but it returned something I hadn't expected. A clarity. His choice had never been about her being better than me. It had been about him fleeing himself. I could respect the honesty without inviting it back into my life. I answered, Thank you for the letter. I accept your apology. We're done. Please send any logistical items through email. No more personal messages. I hit send. The cursor blinked at the end of that last line like a door closing. I cried then. Not the storm cry of discovery. Not the keening cry of the restaurant goodbye, but a soft, private crying for a life that had meant something, even if it ended badly. I started therapy, an expensive kindness I gave myself without the usual ledger of guilt. My therapist was a woman with silver-streaked hair and an office full of plants that seemed to breathe along with you. She said things like, Where do you feel that in your body? And let's not rush to make meaning. For the first few sessions, I talked in lists. Then I started telling stories. I keep thinking of it like this, I said one day, hands cradling a mug. We had a house, and he set fire to one room. But the smoke got everywhere. She nodded. And you ran out. I ran out, I echoed. Barefoot. But I ran. We talked about my habit of calling myself we, even when I meant I. We talked about the way I apologized for crying, for laughing too loud, for taking up space. She gave me homework that wasn't really homework. Choose one small pleasure each day and do it without justification. I began collecting them like seashells, a fresh notebook, a walk after dinner, phone left behind. Gooseberries I ate standing at the kitchen counter, tart enough to sting. I returned to work with a focus that surprised me. My boss, who had noticed the shadows under my eyes for months but said nothing, called me in. I don't know what's changed, she said. But your writing, it's sharper. It's you. I lost something, I said, then added, and found something. She nodded like she understood without needing the details. She gave me a project I'd been hinting at for years, one with my name on the byline in bold. I printed the draft and taped it to my wall, not as a trophy but as proof. Seasons turned. I learned the particular music of my new street. The neighbor who practiced violin badly at dusk. The child who shouted spells into puddles. The night bus exhaling at the corner. I made friends with an older woman 2 floors up, who had a garden's worth of herbs in chipped teacups, and a laugh that filled the hall. We swapped dinners once a week, her rosemary potatoes for my chickpea stew, her stories about a husband gone 20 years for my fragments about a marriage gone last month. One Saturday we painted my living room a color called soft clay. The can promised calm. The result looked like the inside of a seashell. We stood back, cheeks smudged, and admired our work. "It suits you," she said, and I believed her. On another evening I passed a little community center and heard piano. A sign outside read "Open mic, all welcome." I didn't go in. Not that night. But the next week I did, slipping onto a folding chair near the back. People read poems, sang, told jokes that weren't good but were brave. I didn't perform. I clapped until my hands stung. After, a woman with ink-stained fingers handed out flyers for a writing group. Low stakes, she promised. Mostly snacks and a deadline. I tucked it into my pocket. I didn't need to become someone new. I just wanted to become myself on purpose. Closure. Without permission. Months later, on a bright, clean afternoon, I ran into Daniel on a side street near the bookstore we used to haunt. Time had made him both older and softer. He wore a jacket I didn't recognize and grief in the way he held his shoulders. We stood there, 2 people who had once shared a bathroom and a mortgage and the secret language of breath. "Hi," he said, cautious, as if I might bite. "You look good." "So do you," I lied kindly. "How are you?" He asked, the universal nonsense question. "I'm okay," I said, and for once it was true. We spoke briefly about the dog we never adopted, how he'd finally gotten one from a shelter, a mutt with anxious eyes. I told him I'd started a writing group. He said he was in therapy. We were 2 planets on distant orbits nodding across the black. "I'm sorry," he said again. But this time the word didn't land like a plea. It landed like weather, acknowledged, not negotiable. "I know," I said. We parted with an almost smile. I stood for a moment, watching the door close behind him. There was no lurch in my stomach, no urge to run after him with an armful of second chances. Just a quiet, tender recognition. The past had happened. The future was mine. The life I choose. That night, back in my soft clay living room, I opened my notebook to a fresh page. The first 3 lines came easily, as if they'd been waiting by the door. He chose his mistress over me. I chose myself over the wreckage. Both choices were honest. Only one was love. I lit a candle, not for remembering, but for light. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the neighbors' teacups on my windowsill. I put on music, something gentle, and cooked pasta for 1 in a pot big enough for 2, just because I wanted leftovers. When I sat down to eat, I raised my glass to no one and everyone. To the girl who had believed love could be a shield. To the woman who learned it could be a door. To the morning I walked into the ocean wind and felt my life turning back toward itself. to every small courage that stitched me together on the days I thought I'd unravel. Tomorrow, I would wake up and do ordinary things, reply to emails, water herbs, fold laundry, go to the writing group with a messy draft in my bag. There would be moments when grief knocked at the window and I'd let it in for tea. There would be laughter that sounded like it belonged to me. There would be a sky, big and blue, even on the days I forgot to look up. I set down my fork and smiled, not at a memory or a promise, but at this simple, miraculous fact. After everything ended, my life had the audacity to begin.